Today on the Break It Down show, we have a very distinguished guest, Lieutenant Colonel John Nagl. He's a hero.
Absolutely he's a hero, yes.
And it's easy to say anybody who serves in uniform is a hero, but John Nagl has affected thousands of lives. Thousands and thousands of lives. Tens of thousands of lives of military personnel and of civilian personnel wherever we are.
That's right.
He
absolutely did.
Made, guided, influenced policy decisions and practical delivery of policy decisions.
Yes. Yeah, he worked for General Petraeus, General Mattis. Guys are both 4-star generals, and it was their job to turn the Iraqi campaign around, turn the Afghan campaign around. Both these guys are what's called the CENTCOM commander. Their boss is the president. There's nobody higher.
Right.
So they looked to John as one of the key guys to writing the manual that showed us how to flip those fights around. And I'll be damned if we didn't get a document in less than a year that enabled every commander since then to better understand how to do this war that we had never really fought effectively before.
And that we had gone in and screwed up because we'd never understood it.
Yeah.
So after he came back from Iraq, he served as military assistant to then Deputy Secretary of Defense Paul Wolfowitz. I mean, he's a heavy hitter.
There's no doubt. He's a Rhodes Scholar.
Yeah.
You know what a lot of civilian folks don't realize is the amount of value the military places on education and its leaders. And a leader, I mean NCOs, officers across the board. And he went to Oxford not once but twice while in uniform.
Yeah. Started out with a degree in international relations at West Point.
Right.
Graduated near the top of his class, Rhodes Scholar, went to Oxford, eventually earning a master's in philosophy.
He also has a master's in the military arts. So he's got 2 master's degrees and then went back to Oxford and got a PhD. Yeah,
he's truly an American hero in the sense that he had the horsepower to do anything he wanted.
Right.
I mean, could have gone the Ivy League route, could have been you name it.
Yeah. I mean, look, if you're going to go to West Point as a kid, you have to stand out, not just in your school, but in your district. There aren't 3 people in a district that go to West Point.
Here's the thing about West Point that a lot of people don't know. It's free.
It's free. Yes.
For them to identify you as having the makings of a West Point man, it's big because they're not just saying, yeah, we'd like you to come to West Point. Yeah. They're saying we'd like you to come to West Point and we're paying for it.
Yeah. And then he went and fought in the Gulf War. So not only is he an academician, he was a combatant commander, running tanks around, killing tanks, killing tanks. And those guys all did a great job. I mean, they wiped out the Iraqi tank force in hours.
One stat that I enjoyed was that the Iraqi military went from the 4th largest army in the world to the 2nd largest army in Iraq in a matter of 10 hours.
You could also say that they went from the 4th largest army in the world to the largest track team in the world.
You could say that.
It's one way to do it. Either way, he's our guest today. And I'm super stoked about this because this reflects a lot of my work with the stuff he's done. And I can't wait to compare notes as a guy that wrote at the theoretic level, the doctrinal level, and compare notes to what I saw on the ground, because what he's trying to give us the guidance to do is impossible. It's impossibly hard to do. There's good and there's bad within that. I can't wait to have that conversation with him.
Also, we speak so highly of his military accolades, but he's just a great man. Yeah. He's the headmaster at a school that prepares young people for the upper echelons of leadership.
Yes.
And he is the most sincere guy that you could meet regarding his desire to serve our country and our country's young people.
Have you noticed the theme between the people that we have on this show, regardless of what they do, whether they're an author, a warrior, a musician, they're all humble, and you just can't get John to say, I was the king of it. Nope, won't do it. And I've got to say, I know he's going to promote the book and everything, but I can easily see us getting away from that. So you've got to do yourself a favor. If you're interested at all in what's happening in foreign policy and how the military plays in, you've got to get a copy of his book, because it really is excellent at breaking down that time, what it meant to write that book, and how it helped commanders turn a fight that we were literally losing into something that Iraq had a chance.
So the book that we'll be talking about today He's got a couple, but the book we'll be talking about today is called Knife Fights, a Memoir of Modern War in Theory and Practice. It's a brand new book. You can go to your local bookstore and pick it up, and I really suggest that you do it because even if you're not a military enthusiast, it's a great read, and he gives a terrific understanding of what it takes to go into a culture that is other than yours and get through to the people. It's not just a book about fighting. Right. It's not just a book about war.
Right.
It's a book about merging cultures and understanding the good that we all want together for ourselves, for each other.
Learning from history, learning from former insurgent fights. If you want to have a better understanding of what it really is, the time it takes to do this stuff, you don't just show up and 4 years later you're done. You know, why you have to stay. It's covered in the book, and it's excellent.
So go to the Amazon link on our website and buy it there. Just click through breakitdownshow.com to Amazon. It doesn't cost you any more money, doesn't do anything except let Amazon know that you got there through us. And we appreciate it because we get a little kick. We get a few nickels in the process.
Yeah.
Or go to your local bookstore and patronize the folks who are bringing literature at the grassroots level. And here it is, our interview with Lieutenant Colonel, Headmaster, Dr. John Nagl. What do I call you, sir? I was never in John the military, Nagl. So I don't know the protocol.
John Nagl is fine. Headmaster Nagl is fine. Dr. Nagl is fine. John is fine.
That's a lot.
Any of the above.
Terrific.
And you can rotate. You could set up an app that shows which title to get.
Which one's up next?
Yeah, that's right. And I'm a professor as well, so I've just got titles falling out of my ears.
Yeah. And a list of stuff. I mean, we can say during the course of our conversation that you literally wrote the book on military professionalism. Among many other things.
Certainly a book.
Yeah.
Certainly a book on that, if not the
book.
Yeah.
So, as you transition to life as a headmaster, having retired from a distinguished military career, how does that work? I mean, you have a great gig now, but it seems like academia is a little different from a military career. Is that not true?
Well, I think you're overstating the success of my military career. For a soldier, I was a very good scholar. We're finding out now, for a scholar, whether I'm a good soldier. So I spent much of my time in uniform actually in school or teaching school. I spent a number of years at Oxford getting degrees, some years teaching at West Point. And I'd always planned to have three careers: a career in the Army that included some scholarly stuff, a career in Washington in doing policy things, and then ultimately ending up as a college president or as a college professor. And I've roughly followed that plan. My Washington tour was a little shorter than I predicted it would be, but that was the decision to leave the Center for New American Security, which I ran for 3 years in partnership with Nate Vick, and take a history chair at the Naval Academy, was in some ways too good of an opportunity to pass up. It was also, frankly, an opportunity to spend some time getting to know my son while I still had him at home. And I talk in Knife Fights about some interventions my wife made to help me prioritize what I was going to do at different phases of my life.
I think with as much forethought as went into your planning of three careers, you'll probably end up saying, or I hope you end up saying, that her interventions were key to a happy life as much as your plan was key to a successful life.
I have, in every case, the interventions she has made have led me to make decisions that I think have improved my quality of life, if not necessarily my broad policy impact. And so I think I'm having a narrower, but I hope deeper impact at the Naval Academy, where I got to influence a middling number of students, but some of them influenced pretty deeply as I mentored them in scholarship competitions, something I continue to do with some of my former students. And now I've got 1,000 boys, 250 faculty members, although I am to influence and inspire toward lives of purpose and of meaning, but also still have the opportunity through publishing, through public speaking, through podcasts with my friends to spread policy ideas fairly broadly and hopefully to influence national level conversations.
Well, we certainly came to you to talk about your book, Knife Fights, a Memoir of Modern War in Theory and Practice. It fresh out this year and very, very interested in your path as you describe it. So how old was your son when you started making decisions that you needed to connect with him a little more than you had forethought when you laid out your roadmap?
So I left the Center for New-American Security and became a professor at the Naval Academy in January of 2012. Jack would have been 11 at that point. But honestly, my decision to leave the Army 3 years earlier in 2008 was also driven by, in no small part, by a desire to be a better father. I think I'd been a pretty good Army officer. I've been a good public advocate for a counterinsurgency strategy in Iraq and Afghanistan. But in 2008, when my son was 7 or 8, I was regularly not seeing him during the week, going to work before he woke up, coming home after he was in bed, often working weekends as well in the Army. I don't want to sound like a martyr here. Many people have made far greater family sacrifices than I have, but I do just have the one son. And he was growing up fast. And one of the joys of becoming a history professor and now a headmaster has been getting to know him as a person and hopefully build some bonds that will endure for the generations I hope he still has in front of him.
Yeah, it seems that you made that realization in the nick of time. We've been very, very fortunate to have a lot of folks with a lot of accomplishments, and the common thread amongst those who are, in their 50s and 60s is a lot of them say, I'm a much better grandparent than I was a parent. And, that happens when you don't catch it in time.
And that's, I hope that I am able to say that I'm a better grandparent than parent. But I hope
as well, but the bar is high. Yeah.
Hey, Colonel Nagl, I'm going to call you that this time. Thanks for giving me that answer, because I speak commander at a high level and I speak officer at a high level. And so I'm looking at your bio, and you've done very well. Rhodes Scholar, PhD. You have all the hallmarks of a career that still had a lot of energy at lieutenant colonel. There's like an inertia that careers have, and I'm sure you see that. So you get the command at the right time, you're picked for certain things, and you're on your way to colonel, potentially even general, with all the things that you'd already accomplished at that point. But you saying that you made a conscious decision to pull out and raise your son while you still had a chance, that settles in my mind. Okay, cool. I understand why you go as a colonel and go make that sacrifice, because the only thing you have to look forward to is more time overseas, either commanding a brigade or being a DCO or whatever it is. There's a huge, huge time commitment while you're even home, not home.
That's certainly true. It's also, as you may know, an extraordinarily exciting and fulfilling career.
Absolutely.
So, people ask me if I miss the military, and I say absolutely every day.
It's intoxicating.
It's intoxicating. I was part of a team of committed professionals who were the best in the world at what they did, and that team changes the course of history. And so I do miss being a part of that organization. That said, I'm part of another great organization now, and fortunately, and really for the first time in my life, I am not exclusively focused on implements of death and destruction.
Right.
And there's something deeply satisfying about turning swords into plowshares, about while continuing to write about and think about matters of national strategy and national security policy. I am also worried about the health and safety and well-being of the most precious asset America has, its young sons and daughters.
Yeah, that's a great point.
That's an amazing transition.
Yeah.
Turning swords into plowshares. That's a good one.
Yeah, that's huge. So one of the things that I like to illustrate as a fellow combatant person.
You know what? I want to interject something, though, because I want the lay person to understand what the point that you just made, Pete, and that is that when you read the bio of John Nagl, if you have military experience, you wonder, with all of the accolades and all of the education and the scholar that you were, I think the unsaid thing is that you have to look and go, why just lieutenant colonel? Why not, why didn't you become General Nagl? And that's the question that was answered by your comment about your decision to leave the military and raise your son, because it seems like you would have been on that track, and that your military career could have gone as far as you'd wanted it to go. Yes. And that it was your choice to say, I have another priority.
You said that way better.
And he's 9.
Yeah.
So we all leave the military, you either walk out or they carry you out. I preferred to walk out. I felt enormously proud of my military career, delighted to have had the opportunity to work with so many people who remain some of my best friends on the planet. And I do miss serving in uniform. But it was the right decision at the time for my family. And I like to think that I continued to have some degree of influence in national security issues, and still do. I'll let others judge whether I actually do. But I'm hopeful that from this chair, as headmaster of the Haverford School, I can still be a voice for great discretion in the use of military force, getting involved in wars as seldom as possible, only when absolutely necessary. A mistake, I think both of the last 2 administrations, both the Obama and George W. Bush administration, have both gotten involved in military conflicts, employed American military power, when as a nation it was not necessarily in our national security interest to do so. So I hope that I am able to mitigate the number of wars we fight, and also, I hope, argue for more effective military and diplomatic policies, and finally speak for proper care of our veterans and their families, all things I continue to care very deeply about, as well as I hope become a more effective advocate for better education for our next generation.
So apparently you weren't done doing great things, because that's a pretty hefty toll to put on yourself. That's impressive.
Yeah, I appreciate that you have that list of things to accomplish, and I hope that you get a whole lot done in each one of those arenas. But along those lines, if you look back at, and as you point out, we'll see whether or not you were right about all of the things that you wrote about. But history is the only judge of such things. And now that we can look back at the decisions of those administrations and see that there were some, let's be kind and say, ill-timed decisions, or, well, what the heck, as you said, they were bad decisions. But would you say that it requires the look back and that only time has told? Or do you think that both of those administrations, or either of those administrations, were forewarned and perhaps went a different direction in haste?
I think that this is actually a really clear case where we don't have to wait for history to be written. So it's pretty clear to me that the invasion of Iraq in March of 2003 was unnecessary. Even if Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction, as we then believed he did, he could have been deterred. Nation states can be deterred by other nation states. We've run this experiment with the Soviet Union. It works. So the invasion of Iraq was unnecessary in 2003. It was also enormously poorly executed, too few troops, very, very minimal, if any, planning for the post-war, for what would happen after we toppled Saddam Hussein's government, and a number of decisions made in the immediate aftermath of the invasion that not only inflamed, but I would go so far as to say created the insurgency that cost us so dearly over the years to come, and then a series of decisions that inflamed that insurgency, both national level decisions such as disbanding the Iraqi army, all the way down to tactical military decisions, the absence of counterinsurgency doctrine or understanding. So I'm very, very critical of the Bush administration, George W. Bush administration, for its Iraq decisions from 2002, before the invasion of Iraq, all the way through 2006, when they corrected in a major way, replacing Secretary Rumsfeld with Secretary of Defense Bob Gates, replacing General George Casey with General David Petraeus in Iraq, implementing for the first time a counterinsurgency strategy in Iraq. So I think that history has been written. I think that judgment is pretty clear.
Do you think those replacements happened far too late, or that General Petraeus, for instance, was still preparing as he took over?
A very well-informed question. I think that we were very fortunate, and Petraeus would tell you that he was very fortunate to take command in 2007 of an army that had almost to a soldier deployed to Iraq, practiced counterinsurgency very badly, if at all, gone home for a year, thought about it, was ready to try something else the second time it came back for repeat engagement. And he was also fortunate to have the year that he had at Leavenworth prior to taking command in Iraq to write the counterinsurgency field manual, to really think through how he would approach the problem if he got the chance to be in command in Iraq. And it's a fascinating piece of military history. I think never before in history has a general had a year to sit down and write a campaign plan, publish that campaign plan, and then go execute it with very good history-changing results on the ground. So I think Petraeus was lucky to have that time. I'm more mixed on Rumsfeld, on whether Rumsfeld should have replaced earlier. He was, it's hard to remember now, on the cover of either Time or Newsweek magazine the week before the attacks of September 11th. A photo of him was on the cover, and the caption was "Dead Man Walking." He was a very unpopular cabinet member already in 2001. Looked like he might be the first person replaced from the president's cabinet. I'm conflicted on Rumsfeld. He's a very talented man. Had, in fact, the mission of the Pentagon for the George W. Bush administration had been to downsize the post-Cold War military to build a lighter, faster, meaner force for conventional force-on-force conflict, which is what George W. Bush ran on, what Rumsfeld was hired to do. I think he actually was probably the right guy to do that. He was the wrong guy to lead the United States through two protracted counterinsurgency campaigns. And the nation was super fortunate that Bob Gates answered the call, and in my eyes turned around two different wars that were going badly. Obviously served as Secretary of Defense for two different administrations and two administrations of different parties, which had never happened before, and earned, I think, a clear acclamation as the finest Secretary of Defense the nation has ever had.
Yeah, did an amazing job under both of those circumstances, where just under one of either of those circumstances would have been terrific accomplishment.
Correct.
And I want to go back to the point because your writing exposed me to the Winston Churchill quote, which I'll probably screw up now, but that you can count on Americans to do the right thing after they've exhausted all other opportunities.
Like many Churchill quotes, it's apocryphal, but if he didn't say it, he should have.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things in doing some research on you before we had you on, I listened to your interview on the Daily Show with Jon Stewart. Mm-hmm. You said a thing that resonates with me, and so I'm sort of the reflection of your guys' hard work on the counterinsurgency manual. I'm on the other end of that. I'm all the way boots on the ground, working and talking with colonels, and I'd love to have that conversation with you in a minute too. But you said something on the Daily Show. You said you have to be polite, professional, and ready to kill. And that made the audience kind of step back, and they weren't ready for that because that is the reality. There are people out there ready to kill you, and you have to be hugging kids one moment and with your eye on everybody else because you don't know who's doing what. That's what makes it, and I'm glad you call it a war at a graduate level because that's what makes it so hard. This isn't tank-on-tank fights, and you know the tank-on-tank fight well. Man, it's hard.
And there's nothing easy about tank fighting, but it is at least you have some good idea who your enemies are. They may be camouflaged, but you know who you're fighting.
Well, so the tank-on-tank fight or an artillery fight or the infantry fight, we have fantastic knowledge of the capabilities not only of ourselves but also of our enemy. And I can tell you the maximum effective range of any number of weapon systems, M16s, M4s, the 50 cal, but I defy anybody in the military to give me the same level of detail on how to establish rapport in a repeatable and testable fashion so that, and the military, Army in particular, says train to standard. So when we have to do this counterinsurgency stuff, we have to be able to establish rapport. And all too many times, the training is based on familiarization. It's fanfare in the cultural side of things. We don't do culture at a graduate level. We don't do interpreter operations at a graduate level. And that that defies the success that you guys want to have during the build process of clear, hold, build. What do you think?
That's exactly right. And so we give cultural awareness training when I think what we ought to be providing is cultural competency training. So we have to develop soldiers, Marines, who are competent to work inside that culture, who are competent in working through a translator or an interpreter, who have some basic understanding of the history and the religion and the worldview of the people, the human terrain inside which they're working, with which they're operating. And so we devote enormous resources correctly to teaching lieutenants and sergeants how to read a map, how to understand the physical terrain in which they're going to be fighting. We need to develop an equal focus on helping them understand the cultural, human terrain in which they're going to be operating. We've come a long way, but we still have a long, long way to come.
Yes. Yeah. One of the things that I've found that I can talk to commanders about it forever and still be way ahead of them, which is impressive because colonels are, as you know, wow. I mean, they are highly trained, highly educated, and brilliant. But and
enormously handsome. Love that part.
Well, there are exceptions to that, but present company, I guess, excluded. But I always talk about a cultural line of effort. There are smooth cultural paths that allow you to accomplish your goal if you allow yourself to see them. We always want to talk about economic development. Well, there are proven and existing economic paths that we can follow to create that economic development without inserting more power into the system. One of the standard things I say to every colonel when I first start working for them, they always want to know the most influential person in the region. And I say, sir, it's you. And it will remain them until they can stop imposing their will and allow that local government. And this is during the build phase. They have to surrender that. And I've heard it's almost as if we have to flip a switch and allow the fledgling government to fledgle and fail a little bit so that they can learn the lessons and we can stop and watch how they solve problems and work as if they are the commander.
Well, you guys are talking about a debate that you can have at West Point or at Wharton. The difference is in business or in combat, you're talking about the development of, if I may paint with a broad brush, soft skills versus hard skills. You, like you said, Pete, you can quantify, there are this many guns over there pointed at us and this many of them can fire a projectile that'll reach here. It's a little more difficult to quantify the social obstacles, how many of them there are, how to most effectively combat them, where to aim the social gun, so to speak. And is it that from your perspective, John, do you have insight that you can share with us about your feeling as to whether or not when we deliver cultural insight to our soldiers, where do you aim it? I mean, does it trickle down from the higher ranks? Do you go straight to the boots? What's the formula?
So we don't know the formula yet, unfortunately. The direction really has to come from the top down. For instance, during the surge in Iraq after General David Petraeus took over, he received indications that the Sunni tribes in Al-Anbar some of the Sunni tribes in Al-Anbar were contemplating the possibility of stopping their fight against us and turning against al-Qaeda in Iraq with us, a common enemy. An enormously important shift that ultimately succeeded in reducing the number of people we were fighting in Iraq by 80% or 90% and focused our combined energies on al-Qaeda in Iraq, allowing us to essentially defeat that organization, drive it into Syria, where unfortunately it regained strength and is now back in Al-Anbar. That decision to work with the Sunnis, to stop fighting against the Sunnis, and to partner with them, even though many of them had American blood on their hands, that decision had to be taken by, probably was a national level decision. Petraeus took it on his own and enabled and empowered all of the forces under him to make that decision. So you really need a strategic direction that understands the most basic questions, like who are we fighting against? And simple as that question sounds, currently today in Syria, it's not clear to me who we want to win.
Right.
I know we want ISIS to lose, and I believe we also want President Assad of Syria to lose. However, our airstrikes against ISIS are helping him remain in power. So you have to figure out the base level questions of who you want to be in power. This is the Dave Petraeus question that he asked repeatedly during the invasion of Iraq in 2003. Tell me how this ends. And we've done a horrible job of doing what St. Augustine taught us is the only purpose of a war, to build a better peace. We have to start there and think through what we want that peace to look like, and then backward plan to where we are now.
Right.
We've done
with
a
the end
lousy
in mind.
job across two administrations. We didn't do that in Iraq. We didn't do it in Afghanistan. We didn't do it in Libya, which is a disaster now. We are not currently doing it in Syria. It's a very basic strategic principle, and we are not succeeding at it.
If you like the show,
And you know you do, support the show.
there are 3 ways you can support us.
Number 1, go to iTunes or Stitcher or wherever you listen to podcasts.
And leave a 5-star rating and review.
It helps with the show metrics and helps us get better placement. Number 2,
Visit our website.
www.breakitdownshow.com.
We've got an Amazon and an eBay link.
Same Amazon, same eBay, you know and love, but they give us a little kickback when you get to their site from ours. And number 3, leave comments about the shows that you like. We want to know what you think, how you feel.
Tell us how to make the show better. We greatly appreciate it.
Now back to the show.
You're hitting me right in the heart, because absolutely, I'm there at the end as troops are drawing back away from Baghdad, and I watched President Obama say all of the combat troops have left Iraq while I'm sitting in a room full of artillerymen, combat arms people, but they're there just to teach and train, and I watch them teach and train, and I talk to the people every night, and they don't care. It's not their military. They're all predicting that as soon as we leave, a civil war of some kind will break out. Man, for as much as we got that turn and you know, we got the Sunni awakening to happen, we couldn't affect the rest of the fight. And I'm saying affect with an A. And really, I think modern military operations, once you get past clear and hold, you have to switch from an effect-based military measurement to an affect-based military measurement. What do you think?
I think that's probably too subtle for most of my tank drivers to understand. So I try to find sir, why are you talking funny? Yeah. I try to, I say that with enormous respect for my tankers. So I try to find a different way to say it. But I do think that as we shift from the clear phase, where we will largely be using, our focus will be on the employment of our military weapons. We'll also be doing some stability operations as well. As we move from the clear to the hold phase, and into the build, we will be focusing much more on other forms of power, on political power, on persuasion, on economic development, and those resources, which soldiers aren't as familiar with, but need to be more familiar with in order to build lasting results out of the death and the destruction that they've caused in phase one and the clearing phase. If you don't do the hold and the build, the bad guys are going to come back possibly stronger than before. The local allies who worked with you the first time will be unlikely to do it again.
They'll be emotionally invested in the other direction.
And one of the reasons for the success of the Islamic State progressing rapidly through Al-Anbar over the course of this calendar year, like a hot knife through butter, has been because the Sunnis in Iraq were so disenchanted with their Shia-dominated government in Baghdad that they actually thought ISIS would be better than their own people governing them. It's turned out not to be true. I think many of them now regret that choice, but that's how lousy a job their government was doing at taking care of them, and it's part of the price we paid for withdrawing our troops. We also withdrew the political leverage that comes the political intelligence that comes with having American boots on the ground. And we are going to be paying the price for that mistake. So I earlier criticized the Bush administration, justly so, I think, for getting us involved in Iraq in the first place in 2003. I'm slightly less critical, but I'm still very critical of the Obama administration for making the unforced error against very good military advice of pulling all American troops out of Iraq at the end of 2011. The Joint Chiefs, myself, many others predicted that al-Qaeda in Iraq would come back. The Sunnis would be disenfranchised by the Shia. And the good news is we were right, and the bad news is we were right.
Wow.
Yeah, that's true. And again, as a guy that was there at the end and watched these things happen, I would tell you that almost for sure, even if we left a force behind, this same thing was going to happen because we had failed the Iraqis earlier in how we can teach and train these guys all we want. We're teaching and training them right now. And you and I both know if we go there, we're going to watch American troops teach them sand table drills, or they're going to teach them how to land nav on a map, skills that they simply do not need. I don't ever see a lieutenant in the Army go on a combat patrol, refer to a map. They might have Blue Force tracker, but they're just looking to see where the people are in the area. They aren't actually navigating. So the skills that we think are important, that sergeant majors, and God bless the sergeant major, we love those guys, but we don't need to teach them sand tables anymore. We need to get past that and get them to a higher level. And we don't need to build NCO academies to do something that's culturally wrong. So how do we improve that? It's that cultural intelligence that we lack, but I see you nodding. I'm going to shut up. Go ahead.
So it's that cultural competence that we talked about earlier. When I left the Center for New American Security to become the first Minerva professor at the Naval Academy, one of the reasons I did is because I so strongly believed in the Minerva program. Previously mentioned Gates, probably the best Secretary of Defense we've ever had. He was deeply concerned by the lack of cultural competence he saw in his forces and determined to change that, to do better. And so one of the ways he decided to do that was by putting academics to focus on cultural competence and cultural relevance, cultural intelligence at the service academies, at the war colleges, with an idea that they would read and think and publish and inspire further debate on just these questions of when we are training and advising a foreign force, do we want it to look like us, or do we want it to be effective in that environment? And effective in that environment, what we sometimes somewhat rudely, in my eyes, called Iraqi good enough or Afghan good enough.
Yeah, that's terrible.
Iraqi good enough may be better than American. And this goes to the overused T. Lawrence of Arabia quote, right? Do not try to do too much with your own hands. Allow them to do it, and they will surprise you with their ingenuity. Their way may not be our way, but it may be more effective, particularly if we can provide them with the scaffolding of American intelligence, American logistics, American command and control and communications, all of those American combat multipliers, along with the linguistic skills and the cultural knowledge that they already have, can create a force that is certainly competent enough to prevent ISIS from being a threat, at least in Iraq, if not in Syria. Syria is a much harder question.
One of the things that I found from talking directly to Iraqi police officers and soldiers, apart from the public's total dismissal of their competence, and again, that would be our fault because we didn't show the people that they were doing combat lifesaver training. We were teaching their police officers to give IVs, and there wasn't an Iraqi that I ever found that knew it. I could tell you stories about this stuff all day long.
Right.
My question is so ISIS is there, right? And they're going to go and fight. What I will tell you is that the lowest level soldier, the Jundi, the guy that gets paid the least, will turn his back and let that action happen, whatever ISIS wants to do, because he has no faith in his command.
Well, and I agree with that. And a big part of the reason for his lack of faith in his command is that when we departed, we removed all the political leverage we had on then Prime Minister al-Maliki. And Maliki, literally the day after the last U.S. troops departed in December of 2011, the next day fired his Sunni vice president and put him under arrest. And that was the first of many moves that removed capable, competent Sunnis, in particular, capable, competent Sunni battalion, brigade, division commanders, and replaced them with Shia loyalists, Maliki loyalists, who did not have military competence, but did have personal loyalty to Prime Minister al-Maliki. They were his stooges. And Maliki was more afraid of a coup from his Sunni military than he was of an attack by a resurgent al-Qaeda in Iraq, which is what ISIS grew out of and became. So Maliki completely misread the situation. Those stooges fled at the first sign of ISIS approaching, and an army of lions led by a lamb will always be defeated by an army of lambs led by a lion. In this case, pretty good enough for Iraq. Iraqi good enough troops were abandoned by their commanders. The defenses of Al-Anbar unhinged by the cowardice of Maliki appointees, a big part of the reason for the success of ISIS over the course of this year.
I would even say that Maliki also had, and much like our system, he was in charge, had the ability to change things to favor his party, and was almost required to do that, not only to protect from a coup against Sunni people, but also to pay the bill with the Shia folks as well. That was almost inevitable. I've heard a number of Iraqis talk about that, how he was going to continue to populate the government with Shia people. Even the Shia residents that I talked to said, we don't have all of the people that we need to have in our side of the this is not a religious fight. This is a political fight. On our side of the political spectrum, we didn't get the good education under Saddam's reign. We don't have these people. We need some of these Sunnis here because they've been to London and they've been to college. And it always surprised me to hear them say that, where this isn't about religion. This is about who's capable. And the guy that you guys picked to be mayor of this region is a shoemaker, and he's an idiot. The guy that used to be, you guys don't even talk to him. You don't even know he exists, and he would love to do it. We would love to have him do it. This is Sunni and Shia conflict being erased because this guy has the capabilities and the faith of people across faith. He had their buy-in, and we couldn't ever see our way to understand that.
And the political strategy, the stories you tell are very similar to the stories out of Vietnam. We have to find a way to be as competent politically as we intervene in these foreign countries as we are militarily, and we have to devote as many resources to understanding the politics of these countries as we do to understanding the physical terrain of those countries, or we're never going to be able to accomplish our objective of leaving behind a stable government that has some degree of respect for all of the people, and that is able to create and maintain a state structure such that terrorist enemies of the United States cannot again use that terrain as a place from which to attack the United States and our friends around the globe.
Well, that's the scaffolding of American intelligence that you speak of. And I think that that's a complicated thing to leave behind and entrust when, we can put up that scaffolding. And then, like you said, and I want to interject, it's interesting having a conversation with a headmaster because your ability to impart these nuggets of wisdom through quotes is really syncing with me. I think, and I think our listeners are going to find those nuggets, they're going to treasure them the same way. When you leave behind that scaffolding, it's hard to just put it up and say, here, now, you guys climb it. And you guys climb it as you see fit to build. Because it's hard to trust the ability of a society that's a lot different than ours to behave the way we... And here's the key. We want them to behave in a manner that we want, as opposed to in a manner that is conducive to, them sitting at the table as a society with us. They're going to have differences. They're going to think differently, and they're going to behave differently, and they have different cultural norms. So it's not easy, and I can see the struggle there.
It's not easy at all, but there are many directions in which the interests correlate, in which our interests are aligned. And we have to do a better job of figuring out what those are first and reinforcing that effort. But you're absolutely right. It's not a scaffolding. It requires long-term, persistent engagement from the American advisor to the Iraqi brigade commander, all the way up to President of the United States, to Prime Minister. And it requires that level of engagement for probably a generation. And this is one of the reasons why I am so averse to American military interventions, why I did not favor the invasion of Iraq in 2003, because these interventions have long tails of a generation and more. The American effort to arm the Mujahideen in Afghanistan via Pakistan
still biting us on the ass.
I'm sorry?
Still biting us on the ass.
Still biting us in the butt, right? That operation in the 80s, which contributed to the defeat of the Soviet Union in Afghanistan, to the ending of the Cold War, dissolution of the wall, all sorts of goodness came from that. But that also enabled and empowered a generation. Many of the Mujahideen became jihadis, and Osama bin Laden was one of those Mujahideen. So we contributed to the creation of Al-Qaeda and the attacks of September 11th by the book and movie Charlie Wilson's War tells so poignantly in the final chapters at the end of the movie by failing to continue to engage in that part of the world after we had accomplished our immediate objectives. So I think a very valid criticism of American foreign policy is that we tend to have short attention spans. We are, which I'm the headmaster of a boys' school. You know what you call a boy with attention deficit disorder? A boy. So, this is a problem I deal with on a daily basis. We as a country have to understand the long-term effects of putting energy into the system, and the fact that if we don't continue to maintain our operations, our personnel, our influence, our advice in that part of the world, it will very likely, that energy will come back and hit us. And we failed to learn that in Iraq. What I'm deeply concerned about is that we're going to make the same mistake again in Afghanistan.
John, I got to be honest and say I've seen units rotate in. So I've seen the results of the training, and I've been through the training, and the training is not up to standard. We kind of covered this earlier. And to achieve those goals that you're talking about, I would love to see us do it, but we simply aren't prepared for it. The military culture doesn't support it. I watch commanders have their marching orders. Fill the task gill is the example. We want to get everybody into the government seats so the government can function, and that becomes the commander's objective. And only a commander that's brave enough to say, "Why isn't the task gill filled 10 years later?" can step back and ask that question, why, and work on that why before they can fill it. Otherwise, all the majors repeat the mantra, fill the task gill, fill the task gill. And they send patrols out to go find people who are willing to go into the government. And so now we force this action. Again, that's the commander imposing his will, and nothing changes. To amplify that point a little bit, I want to use John's example again of the scaffold. We come in as a unit, we build a scaffold, try to support this government and do some work on it. And then the next unit comes in and says, this scaffold's built all wrong. And they build the exact same scaffold. And it drives the locals crazy. It makes them nuts. And so that we get a sufficing behavior instead of a compliant, progressive behavior where people can start to believe in their own government. What are your comments on that?
And so we made a series of very important decisions in the wake of the Vietnam War, obviously, going to an all-volunteer force. And during the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, rather than processing individual replacements, we processed units. We did unit replacements. And I think on balance, the benefits of unit replacement outweigh the costs. But there is the challenge of losing an entire year's worth of combat experience, of local knowledge, with all at once. With the complete departure of a unit. And so I would love to see staggered deployments, at least in some of the key leadership positions, to try to ensure that we don't build the scaffolding, spend a year building the scaffolding, tear it down, and then rebuild it again. It just to be built across the street, and then the next unit comes in the following year and builds it back in the first place over again. There's a way to maximize the effectiveness of our forces, to keep cultural and regional knowledge on the ground more effectively than we have now. We have to be more creative in our personnel policies, in our rotation policies, in order to maximize the long-term effectiveness of our efforts.
I agree with you there. And one of the things that David Kilcullen, who's a coin expert, I think where he gets wrong, and we can say this now because we've got some years to look at it, and I've got enough deployments to say it's not 3 months of getting settled in. And there's literally 3 months a battalion commander has to really create an effect. The rest of the time, he's either moving in, figuring out what the heck is going on. Like as an advisor, I can't even talk to the guy. I can't even approach him. I've got to talk to a captain and then finally earn my way in. It takes me weeks to do. I know the process. It takes weeks. And then by the time they're effective, I can look at them and say, you guys have 5 decision cycles left that are going to matter. After that, a good portion of your operation is going to be focused, and rightfully so, focused on packing up and leaving. The XO is almost completely disengaged at 6 months and looking at how to get stuff onto Connexes and out of there. So really, you're looking at 3 months out of a year-long deployment, which makes it very tough to accomplish anything long-term because you're working at a 25% effective rate, if that high.
Correct. And so for all the benefits of unit deployments, for the cohesiveness, the relationships that are formed inside units, it is not the most effective way, I don't think, to accomplish our national security objectives on the ground. And so I do think we need to go to a mixed system of overlapping, staggered deployments in key personnel, including, and there's smart, inventive ways to do that, including a year-long deployment for the battalion intelligence coordinator, the second-ranking intelligence officer in a battalion. His year-long deployment is actually staggered over 18 months. So that spends enough time with the first unit to get smart and enough time with the second unit to pass on that smarts. We have to do a better job of that.
Yeah, we have to do a lot of the training pieces, and a lot of that rotational stuff has to be addressed, because I can have a conversation with a farmer and have him tell me, in Afghanistan, why should we believe in the government? This is Taliban country, always has been, it's always going to be. Matter of fact, your nation is in negotiations with the Taliban right now on how they're going to be part of this government. So tell me now, again, why a government that can't do anything for me, I should be following. And that's a hard question to answer.
It is, and this goes to the broader cultural problem, right? The Taliban is going to be a part of the solution in Afghanistan. It is a local solution that works to providing some degree of governance in many of the tribal parts, the Pashto parts of Pakistan and Afghanistan. We need to moderate the Taliban, find the moderate Taliban leaders, draw a distinction between capital T Taliban, really driven by a radical Islamist ideology, and small T Taliban, who are much more practical people, and find a way to work with the small T Taliban as part of the long-term security solution in Afghanistan.
Well, I would like to interject, because as the non-military man in the room,
we're getting deep in it.
Yeah, you guys are getting deep in it. We have a few minutes left with you, Colonel, and I'm going to deflect the conversation because I want to talk about the way that your career and your life has progressed. You started off, and again, I'm just painting with a very, very broad brush here, but I want to paint a picture that you sort of went backwards from writing a book on military professionalism and then guiding the lives of military men, and then guiding the education of military boys as they became men. And now you're the headmaster of a school that's got kindergartners.
It does.
It seems like you've gotten closer and closer to the roots in your ability to affect how we behave and how our young men and young ladies take in information and process it and go out into the world and do good things. And here you are now at Haverford School. What is that like, and how has your military training and your education leading up to being headmaster there affect your ability to deal with kindergartners?
So there is no such thing as a bad day when you're in the lower school working with the kindergarten boys. And anytime I am having a bad day, I do go over to the lower school to regain my faith in humanity, They are just happy little people. My desire to educate young men and women, I've taught women as well at West Point, at the Naval Academy, at Georgetown, comes from a love of learning myself, and from a real sense that the best way to learn a subject is to teach it. So when I've taught courses, designed courses myself and taught them, they generally come out the way I thought they did, but I always learn something along the way. And I often say, you don't really understand a subject until you've tried to teach it to somebody. I gained a realization at the Naval Academy when I was teaching really the finest young men and women in America, that in a lot of ways they'd already been formed. Their important life decisions had already been made. And I wanted to, as you suggest, come closer to the source, to affect younger minds and try to alter the trajectory of their life earlier.
Get them before the cement dries.
Before the cement dries, right? Before the brain hardens. And I've had some success in doing that. I will say probably my single favorite thing. I team teach a course in my upper school to juniors and seniors, 17 and 18-year-olds, on the modern Middle East. My compadre in that is a Naval Academy graduate, a former Marine veteran of Al Anbar. So it's tough team teaching with a former Marine. You have to speak really slowly, very small words. But it's a joy to work with him, a young teacher, to teach that young teacher, and to learn from that young teacher, and also to work with the young minds. So it's a constant joy being able to be refreshed by the enthusiasm, the desire to learn, and the clear desire to make a difference that marks all this generation of young people. And if you're depressed about the future of America, if you don't think that we're going to be able to overcome our current political problems, work with this generation of young veterans, this generation of young people, and I guarantee you'll come away optimistic and inspired about the future of our country.
I appreciate you saying that so much.
Yeah, John, I even want to go a step further, and I know I'm critical, and you're critical of some of the things that we've done, the decisions we've made, but what the civilian folks don't understand and what they don't see is what it's like to be in a brigade staff room in particular. In that room, you're going to have several people that either have a PhD or are about to get a PhD. You've got any number of master's degrees. You got people that are raising their kids for trying to solve this problem. And the dedication that you see in that room is unparalleled to anything I've seen in the civilian world, where everybody is pushing that same rock up the hill. They're all compelled to do whatever the commander needs to get this problem solved. And it is incredible to watch these heroes do what they do, and at the level of intelligence and competence that really is not commonly found in the civilian world.
And I'm going to add that, I'm from California, and we're famous out here for leaning to the left. And I think if I may speak for the left, and I don't often do that because I'm not qualified to do so, but if I may speak for some of my left-leaning neighbors, that is the biggest lesson that the military can offer us in the way that we operate as a society, and that is to band together and push the rock up the hill.
Absolutely couldn't agree more. So the teamwork, the sense of shared mission and purpose, and all uniting behind a common goal is something that I immensely valued from my military service. It's something that I see here in my school. We're not defying death on a daily basis, but we are all working together to perform a mission that we believe in. And it's one of the reasons I think so many military professionals, military leaders, end up serving in education. My best friend, Paul Yingling, left after a distinguished military career, is now teaching social studies in an international baccalaureate program in a high school in Colorado Springs. There are lots and lots of us who find the same sense of purpose, the same enjoyment from working with young men and women in a school, in a college, that we did in our military units.
Well, being that you're from Pennsylvania, I'm going to ask, is your friend the heir to the Yingling beer empire?
Sadly, he has no connection.
Boy, did he screw that up?
Sadly.
But as a guy who just moved to Pennsylvania a little over a year ago, I have to say what a wonderful thing it is to have such a good beer, Yuengling's, damn good beer on tap pretty much every bar in this town, in this state. The great sadness of Pennsylvania is they don't sell beer in grocery stores.
That is terrible.
And it's terrible. I fought 2 wars for this country to prevent this kind of thing from happening.
For crying out loud.
For crying out loud. All right, I'm very hopeful. We just had elections here. We've got a new governor here in Pennsylvania. I am enormously hopeful that this tyranny will be overturned.
Right.
And communism will not triumph, and we will be able to buy beer in grocery stores here.
Well, we will definitely lock arms behind you and help you push that rock up the hill.
Another thing we need to address too is the role of the headmaster in every movie I've ever seen. You guys are evil. We need to write a story where you just get to be you. You're a solid dude taking care of kids. And you're like, I'm having a hard day. I'm going to go see the kindergartners. That guy's never portrayed.
Hey, have you read such and such book? No, I don't know if I've read that book. It's the one where the headmaster is kind.
Yeah.
And benevolent.
we want to see that.
That one.
Where he shapes lives and improves things,
and inspires leadership.
Yeah.
As a man who's new to this profession, I have been reading into the literature of headmastership. The books, many of the headmaster books are behind me on my shelves. The most famous one, almost certainly, Goodbye, Mr. Chips. A wonderful story, but in almost all of these books, the saintly headmaster dies at the end, and I'm like, really?
Wow!
Come on!
I was in a dying profession last time. I'm really looking forward to one where I live a long, happy life, working with these great boys and their wonderful teachers, and as you say, both educating and I hope inspiring them to lives of meaning and purpose and fun.
Well, so our listeners can most benefit from your contribution in your career. We want them to do a couple of things. First of all, go buy and read Learning to Eat Soup with a Knife, Counterinsurgency Lessons from Malaya and Vietnam. That's your book that came out in 2003?
Initially, I think in 2002, but close enough.
Okay.
Close enough.
When you're
paperback in 2005, buy the paperback; it's cheaper.
Okay. At a local bookstore, we like to push local bookstores.
Yeah, I approve.
And then go buy Knife Fights: A Memoir of Modern War in Theory and Practice. And that book came out just this year.
It did, just last month. In fact, it's been read by dozens of people.
And if you're so inclined, take a look at the Haverford School and contribute. And if you're in the area, send your kids there for a great education and inspired leadership. And I want to thank you on behalf of our listeners and on behalf of myself for the time that you've given us today and the insight that you've given us. And I want to sign off by saying thank you to, let's see, let's go down the list. Doctor, professor, headmaster, lieutenant colonel,
Rhodes Scholar,
combatant
commander. Hey, we can keep going. There's a whole lot of them. Yeah.
That's more than enough, gentlemen. It's been a huge pleasure. It was an honor to serve this great country, and it is a privilege to serve these great boys.
John Nagl, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.